Good evening from Washington. I'm still reporting on the economy. So let's take a look at the November 9th Republican presidential debate, the topic of which was the economy. First of all, having been in some of these debates, I know how hard it is. It's much easier to sit here and criticize when you have time to think about answers and your heart isn't pounding with adrenaline. But since I can't get this kind of exposure for the time being, it's important to let people know where I stand on the most important issue of this campaign compared to the other candidates.
Italy is on the brink of financial disaster. As president, what will you do to make sure their problems do not take down the U.S. financial system?
Let's start with two things. First, we must grow this economy. We are the biggest economy in the world, and as long as we are stagnant in terms of growth in GDP, we impact the rest of the world. We must do that, but we're not going to be able to do that until we put some fuel in the engine that drives economic growth, which is the business sector.
First of all, I have never been so glad to see a candidate out of the race. From 1995 to 1996, Kane was chairman of the board of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. That alone should be a disqualifier for any federal office. Secondly, answer the question, Herman. I wish politicians would just say, "I don't know," if they don't know. I know what to do. Step one, I'd threaten to withdraw all further contributions to the IMF until democratically elected governance was restored in Italy. For those of you who are dependent on American television networks for your news, you know the networks who are completely dependent on bank loans to stay in business. You may not have heard that the European Union kicked out the elected Prime Minister of Italy last month and replaced him with an EU bureaucrat in what cannot be characterized in any other way than a coup d'etat. This is completely unacceptable to all lovers of national sovereignty and freedom, and the United States needs to stand up and do the right thing. Number two, I would go on TV and explain to the nation the reason Italy is in trouble. It's borrowing from banks. Nations cannot hope to be sovereign, hope to be free, or hope to be financially independent and self-sustaining unless they stop borrowing their money into existence and start issuing their own sovereign money once again without such debt. That's the way nations did it for hundreds of years until recently. This ever-increasing debt is why nations have been forced to buy into the idea of transnational consolidation of power schemes like the European Union, which will ultimately be the absolute destruction of any hope humanity has of remaining free, of escaping serfdom. And most of all, this will be the model for all power consolidation in the future. Get nations in debt, crash their economies, then offer a banker-led solution to their problems, which will always mean giving up more and more of their national sovereignty until we have nothing but one giant new world order where no average person will have a voice in how things are run. So I would tell the IMF that you can't just bypass elected governments with threats of no more free stuff.
We must grow this economy, number one. Number two, we must assure that our currency is sound. Just like a dollar must be a dollar when we wake up in the morning. Just like 60 minutes is in an hour, a dollar must be a dollar.
Herman, all libertarians would agree with you on this point. We need a sound currency, but that's exactly what your cronies at the Fed are not doing. A sound currency means just one thing, and it's written into Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Congress, and only Congress, has the authority to coin money and regulate the value thereof. Guess what? We are doing neither, and you and your colleagues at the Fed are the very ones who are doing it. The Fed is just a giant smokescreen to make Americans think that they are controlling the quantity of money in our system, regulating the value thereof. But they aren't. The big six commercial banks all by themselves create 66% of all the money in this nation. And they create all of it as an interest-bearing debt. Wake up, America. We will soon become Italy, and we will wake up one day with Herman Cain or Ben Bernanke appointed by the World Bank or IMF as our president, or they won't renew America's loans. This is not some wild theory. This is going to happen.
Governor Romney, should we allow Italy to fail? Should we have a stake in what's going on in the Eurozone right now?
Well, Europe is able to take care of their own problems. We don't want to step in and try and bail out their banks and bail out their governments. They have the capacity to deal with that themselves. They're a very large economy, and there will be, I'm sure, cries if Italy does default, if Italy does get in trouble, and we don't know that'll happen, but if they get to a point where they're in crisis, and banks throughout Europe that hold a lot of Italy debt will then face crisis, and there'll have to be some kind of effort to try and uphold their financial system. There will be some who say here that banks in the U.S. that have Italian debt, that we ought to help those as well. My view is no. We do not need to step in to bail out banks either in Europe or banks here in the U.S. that may have Italian debt.
Right on, Mitt. I couldn't agree more.
We have to focus on getting our own economy in order and making sure we never reach the kind of problem Italy is having. If we stay on the course we're on, with the level of borrowing this administration is carrying out, if we don't get serious about cutting and capping our spending and balancing our budget, you're going to find America in the same position Italy is in 4 or 5 years from now, and that is unacceptable. We got to fix our deficit here.
Absolutely, Mitt, but you can't ever fix it under the current debt money system, where the big banks create all the money and have zero accountability to we the people. This is literally governance by bank at this point, and you can't possibly be serious about fixing our deficit until you correct this basic problem. No amount of spending or cuts or tax increases will fix this. Both spending cuts and tax increases suck money out of the system, and all the while the interest payments on our national debt will continue to skyrocket. Can't you see it? We are going over the cliff and nobody's talking about it. Our republic, as we have known it, will cease to exist with this next presidential administration unless we wake up from this debt-induced slumber.
Surely, you must recognize that this is a moment-to-moment situation for people who have 401ks and IRAs on the line, and you wouldn't just let it fail, just go away and take our banking system with it.
Who let this stock seller guy into the discussion? Is this what CNBC puts up as a serious journalist allowed to ask questions of presidential candidates? Dr. Paul does a good job of deflecting his question.
No, you have to let it liquidate. We took 40 years to build up this worldwide debt. We're in a debt crisis never seen before in our history. The sovereign debt of this world is equal to the GDP, as ours is in this country. If you prop it up, you'll do exactly what we did in the Depression, prolong the agony. If you prop it up, you do what Japan has done for 20 years. So yes, you want to liquidate the debt. The debt is unsustainable, and this bubble was predictable because 40 years ago we had no restraints whatsoever on the monetary authority.
I just have to break in here to applaud Dr. Paul. Ron Paul is a breath of fresh air in an environment of know-nothing junk economics. However, no restraints on monetary authority. The only thing I would add, Dr. Paul, is that the so-called monetary authority, the Fed, is a joke, a deception. They don't actually control the money supply. The big banks do. They only pretend to be the monetary authority. We, the people, don't control them, and they only pretend to control the real culprits, the 6 biggest commercial banks. You have to go one level deeper than fixing the Fed. Milton Friedman told me getting rid of the Fed without eliminating the ability of the big banks to create money out of nothing will do absolutely nothing by itself. You have to go to the heart of the matter. Okay, let's hear some more.
And we piled debt on debt, we pyramided debt, we had no restraints on the spending, and if you keep bailing people out and prop it up, you just prolong the agony as we're doing in the housing bubble. Right now, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are demanding more money because we don't allow the market to determine what these mortgages are worth. If you don't liquidate this and clear the market, believe me, you're going to perpetuate this for a decade or 2 more, and that is very, very dangerous.
I could definitely live with this guy as my president.
Italy's too big to fail. It's great. I'd love it if we're independent. It would be terrific if you say it's your fault. Just your fault. It's your problem. But if this goes, the world banking system could shut down. Doesn't that involve our banks too?
Oh, painful. He's not running for anything. We don't need his opinion. Italy doesn't have to fail, but it surely will now that Italian Republican governance has been ended by European fiat. Italy, get out of the European Union, the latest version of the New World Order, before it's too late.
So we wake up this morning and we find that the yield curve with respect to Italy is up and prices are down. So if you want a window into what this country is going to look like in the future if we don't get on top of our debt, you're seeing it playing out in Europe right now.
That's absolutely right, Mr. Huntsman. But you have to go a level deeper than just looking at the debt as the problem, and that if we would only cut enough government spending, we could fix this. That's not going to do it. You have to go to the core of the debt generation machine. All our money is created out of debt. We can't possibly get out of debt without getting out of this debt money system. Governments don't have to borrow their money into existence. Governments can create their own money without debt, just like we have done so many times successfully in American history. This is nothing new. It's not some radical experiment. It works. All you have to do is control the quantity. So don't you think, if that's all it takes to fix this and fix it worldwide, don't you think we could find a few volunteers out there who would take an honest look at how much money is in the system? The Fed used to keep track of it. It's called M3. But suddenly, in March of 2006, the Fed started hiding M3. We no longer are allowed to know the total quantity of dollars in circulation in this nation. That's the outrage you should be talking about if you are really interested in fixing the economy. I say, Federal Reserve, turn on M3 statistics again.
We have 6 banks in this country that combined have assets worth 66% of our nation's GDP, $9.4 trillion. These institutions get hit. They have an implied bailout by the taxpayers in this country. And that means we're setting ourselves up for disaster again. Jim, as long as we have banks that are too big to fail in this country, we're going to catch the contagion, and it's going to hurt us. We've got to get back to a day and age where we have properly sized banks and financial institutions.
That's exactly right, Mr. Huntsman. But what you're talking about is reapplying the Glass-Steagall Act to break apart investment banking from commercial banking. That's a good thing to do, but it is nowhere close to fixing the problem that all our money is created as an interest-bearing debt by commercial banks. The only debt-free money the United States currently issues is coins. That is the root of the problem, and until you fix this, you have done exactly nothing. Now let's take a look at Governor Perry.
The next President of the United States needs to send a powerful message, not just to the people of this country, but around the world, that America is going to be America again, that we are not going to pick winners and losers from Washington, D.C., that we're going to trust the capital markets and the private sector to make the decisions.
I love Texas, Rick, but the time for this sort of political rhetoric is long past. We have to get to the core here and fast. Trust the private sector and the capital markets to make the decisions? What do you think we've been doing for the last 15 years? We found out in 2008 that when banks were supposed to maintain a 10% reserve, they had less than 2%. So how's that been working out?
If you are too big to fail, you are too big.
Good one, Governor. If you are too big to fail, you are too big. Do you mind if I start using that line myself?
Why is tax reform the path to job creation? And if it's not the only path, what else can you implement to get people back to work?
Well, first of all, I think Ben Bernanke is a large part of the problem and ought to be fired as rapidly as possible.
Good one, Newt. If we only get rid of that wascally Wabbit Bernanke, all will be well.
The reason we follow, I think most of us, are for tax policies that lead to jobs is because we've had two cycles in my lifetime, Ronald Reagan and the Contract with America, both of which had the same policy. Lower taxes, less regulation, more American energy, and have faith in the American job creator as distinct from a Saul Alinsky radicalism of higher taxes, bigger bureaucracy with more regulations, no American energy, as the president announced again today in his decision on offshore, and finally, class warfare.
Save your breath, Newt. I'll tell you why right now. Because they are all one big club. The Fed isn't really there to serve we the people. It's there just to make us think that someone is controlling the big banks. The only thing federal about the Fed is the name. It's really just a cover for the looting of the American people by the big six banks through debt and foreclosures.
How can you create jobs as quickly as possible?
Well, I think one thing that we know is that taxes lead to jobs leaving the country. All you need to know is that we have the second highest corporate tax rate in the world. But if you look today in the United States, we have an effective rate, if you average in state taxes with federal taxes, of about 40%. But the world took a clue because capital is mobile. And capital went to places where corporate tax rates went to 25%.
Thumbs up. Right on, Michelle. What fueled the Irish boom? They lowered their corporate tax rate to the lowest in the world, 12%. That was good. What they did wrong was they let the commercial banks create unending amounts of money through reckless lending. In other words, no effective regulation of the banking sector. And that's what brought them down. You see, the whole science of economics is, or should be anyway, about one thing: creating stability. Creating stability in the quantity of the money supply. Advanced civilizations need stability to thrive. We now have so much debt in the system worldwide that we have reached a point for the first time in world history called debt saturation. That's where increasing debt no longer increases the gross domestic product of nations. Consumer debt has now flattened out, but sovereign debt, the money nations borrow from banks, is exploding. And this will be the doom of civilization and the end of governments of, by, and for we the people. But until we put the elimination of the debt money system front and center, no effective legislation will ever come out of Congress or any legislature to fix the world economy. Why? Because nations are borrowing from banks.
Energy, and here's something else that we have to do that will help the economy. We have to build the fence on America's southern border and get a grip on dealing with our immigration problem.
Okay.
Thumbs up. I love this woman. The only thing that keeps the world free is independent nations, each pursuing the self-interest of their citizenry. That's why borrowing from banks is so destructive to liberty, because it surrenders national sovereignty. Nations have to be mindful of keeping the banks happy, or the banks won't continue to loan those nations money. But the second most important element of national sovereignty is to maintain defensible borders. This is absolutely a no-brainer to me. Open borders is a one-way ticket to the New World Order, the result of which would be the permanent death of freely elected governments run by we the people. I'll always vote for deconsolidation of power at every level of governance, especially the most important, the international level.
Senator Santorum, you've proposed a zero tax on manufacturing businesses.
I have.
I understand the sentiment behind that, and the state of Michigan's lost hundreds of thousands of manufacturing jobs over the last few decades. Isn't that the kind of distortion in the tax code that people want to get away from in order to get rates down? Flatter, simpler, fairer.
I think getting a rate down to zero is pretty far down. That's good.
But it's down for the manufacturing industry as opposed to people doing other things. Isn't that picking winners and losers?
It's down for a sector of the economy, not picking an individual winner or loser. It's down for an entire sector of the economy that we're getting our hat handed to us by losing jobs.
Thumbs up. Right on, Rick. We have got to do something about this continuous drain of money and manufacturing might out of this country. It's a national security issue that should be treated as an emergency.
Key. Some have suggested we need to go into a trade war with China and have tariffs. That just taxes you. I don't.
Not so sure about that, Rick, but I'd be happy to talk to you about it. I still haven't made up my mind about how to best fix the manufacturing drain out of the U.S., but I can understand tariffs, and they would probably work. Whether it's the most effective remedy, I'm still open. I mean, if we were to triple the price of foreign-made television sets, don't you think there would be a rush to have Zenith start making U.S.-made TVs again?
Many Republicans have criticized the Occupy Wall Street movement. But we had an NBC News Wall Street Journal poll this week that showed a large proportion of the American people, 76%, said they believe there's something wrong with our economy that tilts toward the wealthy at the expense of others.
As I said before, people know something is wrong, but they are confused about what the basic problem is. The two biggest culprits in this confusion are our politicians and our big news media, who are not reporting the simple basics about the root cause of our problems. Number one, nations borrow from banks. And number two, banks create all our money as debt and are completely unaccountable to we the people. When is the last time you elected a banker? Why do you think I hammer away and hammer away on these two basic points? Because no one else will, no one else can. The biggest banks create 66% of the nation's money out of thin air, and they can and do spread it around to their friends liberally. That's the truth about our nation, and it's why we, the people, sense that government and the media no longer are operating in our interest and are no longer determined to tell us the truth. I'll end with two interesting comments from Governor John Huntsman and Governor Mitt Romney.
I do agree that we have blown through trillions and trillions of dollars with nothing to show on the balance sheet but debt, and no uplift in our ability to compete, and no addressing our level of unemployment. And I do agree that we have institutions, banks, that are too big to fail in this country. And until we address that problem, we can fix taxes, we can fix the regulatory environment, we can move toward energy independence. So long as we have instant banks that are too big to fail, we are setting ourselves up for long-term disaster and failure.
Governor Romney, do you believe public companies have any social responsibility to create jobs? Or do you believe, as Nobel laureate Milton Friedman, the most important, most influential conservative economist of the 20th century, held, that corporations should exist solely to create maximum profit for their shareholders?
This is a wonderful philosophical debate, but you know what? We don't have to decide between the two because they go together. Our Democratic friends think that when a corporation is profitable, that's a bad thing. I remember asking some, where do you think profits go? When you hear that a company's profitable, where do you think it goes? And they said, well, to pay the executives, their big bonuses. I said, no, actually, none of it goes to pay the executives. Profit is what's left over after they've all been paid. What happens with profit is that you can grow the business. You can expand it. You add working capital and you hire people.
Yes, Mitt, but our problem today is that corporations are making record profits and aren't hiring people. Why? Because there is no stability. Since the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act in 1999, the banking sector has become the overwhelmingly dominant force in America because they can now manufacture money on an unprecedented scale. The result has been unprecedented instability, not stability. Corporations can't plan a week in advance at this point, much less years in advance, needed to make rational investments in new plants and ventures.
People. The right thing for America is to have profitable enterprises that can hire people. I want to make American businesses successful and thrive. What we have in Washington today is a president and an administration that doesn't like business. That somehow thinks they want jobs, but they don't like businesses. Look, I want to see our businesses thrive and grow and expand and be profitable. I want to see more hiring. I like jobs.
Yes, Mitt, I want corporations to thrive and hire people too. I don't want government to do the hiring. That's called statism. I want an incentive-driven system, because if you aren't leaning forwards, you can't walk, much less run. I just know that no combination of anything you guys are proposing, tax cutting or tax raising, more government spending, or more austerity, is going to fix this as long as you remain inside the box of the debt money system. We have to focus on fixing that first, or all this other talk is just that, talk, and will never lead to effective legislation. I'm still reporting from Washington.